I guess I can start. Well, maybe I'll just stand up for the introduction. I'm Dick Morningstar, founding director and chairman of the Global Energy Center. Most of you have been here before. I want to welcome you. I apologize for the fact that we're in this small room, but the size of the group that's here indicates how important this subject is. And so the purpose for today's session is to introduce Anders Åslund's paper on the Ukraine energy sector, which is the issue of energy in Ukraine, as you all know, is critically important. I've been dealing with Ukraine for, God, since what, 1993, I guess, and it's been an ongoing issue ever since. There appears to have been some very positive moves over the past year in the energy sector. Hopefully that'll continue. Anders will go into all of that. And he'll speak for about 10 minutes or so. And then we have, is that what we decided? Or 15? Did we say 10 or 15? 10 to 15. He has a little slide presentation. And then we have an additional 3 speakers on our panel who I'll introduce. I mean, you all know who, I think everybody knows Anders, who's one of the most, if not the most, renowned economist on issues in the former Soviet Union, and we're very fortunate to have him here now as a resident fellow at the Dinu Petruțiu Eurasia Center. And prior to that, Anders was a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute. And hey, I don't need to say any more about Anders. You know all about him. He's just really the foremost in the field. We're lucky to have Olga Bielkova, who's a member of the Ukrainian Parliament and the deputy head of the Energy Committee. In addition, she's also a member of the Bloc Petro Poroshenko Parliament faction and a permanent member of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of OSCE, and was also a Mason Fellow at the Kennedy School. So very much acquainted with the United States, and she'll respond to what Anders has said and also speak a little bit about what's the RADA? What does the RADA have to do with respect to all of these issues? Then we have Steve Nicandros, who's the founder of Frontera Resources, currently the chairman of the board and the CEO, extremely active here with the Atlantic Council as a board member, extremely active, his company extremely active in Ukraine, as well as other countries in the former Soviet Union, particularly Georgia. And Steve will give a sort of, okay, what does all this mean from a private sector standpoint? And then, no, I thought it was mine for a second. In any event, and then knower of all things, Ed Chow, will wrap things up, Ed being a senior fellow at CSIS. I've known Ed ever since I got involved with energy 20 years ago. He knows more on one finger than what I know about the subject. And so he's a perfect person to wrap things up. This is being live webcast. You can tweet her on it, or whatever the word is. I'm sort of too old for that stuff, but you tweet on it, right? Is that the right verb, to tweet? Okay, you can all tweet on hashtag, what is it, hashtag AC Energy, right? Thank you, Bina. So I'm going to turn it over to Anders, and then after Anders speaks, the rest of the panel will come up.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Dick. What I would like to try to do today is to present this in rather simple terms, very straightforward, with a limited number of points. So I have 3 very simple theses. The first thesis is that Ukraine has done a lot in the last year. If you want to hear a different view, you can ask Ed Chow, whom we have to wrap it up. I'm always seeing that the glass is full, and he's seeing that the glass is empty. No nonsense about half full or half empty here. And the point is that I think that Ukraine has done far more last year than it ever did before in energy reform. Second thesis is that Ukraine is not there yet. It needs really to do a lot more in order to complete the reforms so that this morass of corruption and inefficiency can be ended. And the third is that the West cannot stand by. The West has a very important role to play here. So what has been done in the last year? Household prices of gas, electricity, heating increased by about 4 times, from 12% of cost recovery to 50% of cost recovery. And at the same time, international prices have fallen by half. So then we are approximately there. The whole picture is a bit more complicated because prices are regulated a bit different for various groups. Most energy subsidies were eliminated in that fashion. My assessment is that energy subsidies probably fell by 7% of GDP last year, which is massive. What do you do in such a situation? You give social compensation to the poor people. 4.3 million households, about 1/3 of the Ukrainian households, are supposed to have got a cash compensation. That is, you go with your gas bill and show how much you have paid, and you show the same bill a year earlier, and you should get the difference. Gas consumption last year fell by a stunning 20%. Of course, this is for many reasons. Part of it is the war, part of it is the economy is collapsing, but it's also because prices work. Household consumption fell by 25%. So all this talk that prices don't matter because you can't measure is wrong, empirically wrong. And what does this mean internationally? Ukraine used a few years ago to import about 35 billion cubic meters a year from Russia. Last year it was 6.1 billion cubic meters. For the last 4 months, Ukraine has not imported anything from Russia. I think it will stay like that because of the savings. And Ukraine can now buy gas from the European Union instead. You immediately say, but the European Union doesn't produce that gas. And I say, so what? What matters here is that you buy from a market, that you don't buy from Gazprom directly, and quite a bit of it's produced by Statoil. So what needs to be done? I'll give you 10 reform priorities for this year. The first is that the energy prices should once and for all be unified. Ukraine is very close to do it. Now it has to be fully done. Oop. The second point is develop real energy markets. For gas and electricity, that is still missing. A law on a gas market has been adopted. It needs to be implemented. A law on electricity market has been drafted but not adopted as yet. Third point, get a truly independent energy regulator. There is an energy regulator, but it's controlled by the president. That's not independent. Fourth point, ensure full transparency in this old, murky energy sector in order to clean it up. And with full audit, public audits of the main energy, public energy companies. Fifth point, mechanization and regulation of independent producers reasonable. I think that this is the main shortcoming in the past year. It has been a complete mess, and I hope that Steve will discuss this, what should be done to clear it up. The sixth point is break up Naftagaz. Naftagaz is a big conglomerate with 175,000 employees, about a score major companies with transportation, production of oil and gas, and it accounts for 8% of GDP. There's no reason. What we would like to see here is a full unbundling, divide production, distribution, transportation, and continue to improve corporate governance. Right now, a lot is happening in this area with independent directors being elected by an independent commission to the various boards of the enterprises within Naftagaz. New CEOs are appointed on a competitive basis. This is, of course, vital that you have people who work for the state, the interest, rather than for some specific oligarch, as has been the practice in the Ukrainian energy sector. The eighth point is stop buying gas from Russia. Why? Isn't it natural that Ukraine buys gas from Russia when Russia produces gas? Well, there are two fundamental problems with Russian gas. It's essentially a means of corrupting certain people in Ukraine and buying the Ukrainian leadership. Reuters had a wonderful report on Dmitry Firtash a year ago, where they described how Mr. Firtash had got $11 billion in a credit line from Gazprom Bank. For this money had bought gas cheaply from Gazprom and then sold it at a market price in Ukraine, making, during the Yanukovych period, only in this way, at least $2.5 billion. Essentially money that he made thanks to Gazprom's price discrimination to his benefit. And Mr. Firtash is widely considered to have been the main financier, together with another oligarch, of President Yanukovych two election campaigns in 2010 and 2012. So what does that leave Mr. Firtash as? A Russian agent who handled Gazprom money in order to buy Ukrainian political power. This is the problem with gas trade. With Russia, if Gazprom stops these practices, of course, then one could start trading normally, but we're not seeing that as yet. And make gas transit from Russia orderly. You hear that Russia now wants to build a Nord Stream 2, another pipeline through the Baltic Sea. The purpose is to avoid Ukraine. Why? Well, because of his previous practices by Gazprom that I've just discussed. The problem here is Gazprom and not Ukraine. And we can see that Gazprom has cut repeatedly deliveries to a large number of countries. If you want to see what is being done here, just talk to the Balts.
Yeah, there are a couple. Nadia, why don't you come down here? There are a couple of seats.
And then finally, what should be done? End the 2009 gas contract with Russia, which I should leave that to Ed to explain how bad it has been. So what should the West do? The point is that the Ukrainian state remains weak. Therefore, it needs Western support so that the reformers, we have one here in Olga Bielkova, can stand up against all the corrupt acts from Gazprom and from domestic sources. The other thing is the Ukrainian government is not likely to be able to sort out orderly gas transit through Ukraine on its own. I think that this is particularly a role for the European Union to support there. The third point is pursue EU competition policy against Gazprom. Gazprom should become a normal company. That requires that the EU competition authorities, which are formally very strong, you can ask Microsoft and Google, that they can be so in practice, but we have not seen that practice against Gazprom as yet. This is really a litmus test of the legal strength of the European Commission, if it can prosecute Gazprom. Formally, they are now talking about up to $15 billion of fine. I would love to see a substantial fine on Gazprom so that it really convinces the Russian authorities that they need to change their practices and not try tricks like Nord Stream 2. And then a step further. What do you call an organization from which the president of a country and his closest friend tap $20 to $25 billion a year through a privileged public procurement of pipeline and asset stripping? Boris Nemtsov and Vladimir Milov has documented this very well in the booklets Putin and Gazprom and Putin results. Normally, you call such a thing an organized crime syndicate. Investigate Gazprom as a criminal organization. This would be quite natural. We have a standard saying, know your customer. That you should know that this customer is not involved in serious criminal activities. We do know that Gazprom is involved in this from multiple sources. So why do we allow this? Partly because Gazprom is so big, and partly because it's Russian state. We should not have these double standards in this regard that Gazprom is benefiting from. And on the same line with regard to competition policy, implement EU's third energy package, which Ukraine has signed up for as a member of the energy community, and support Ukraine internationally. Ukraine and Gazprom have now or Naftagaz, I should say, and Gazprom have now 3 cases in Stockholm of a total with claims and counterclaims of about $30 billion on each side against one another. And these are big deals. And Ukraine needs all the support it can get in these matters. If before the European competition authorities have pointed out that Gazprom's practices are illegal, that would presumably substantially change the nature of the legal case. And here, the West, the US and the EU can play a substantial role. So is this politically possible? Yes. The energy oligarchs are down and out. Naftagaz managers are now driving the reform. And these reforms have strong government reform. You might ask if a government is strong, but that's another matter. And it has sufficient parliamentary support, but I leave these political points to Olga. And by Ukrainian standards, we're now seeing an extraordinary transparency. And Ukraine is a funny country. No country is so corrupt and so open at the same time. That's my big hope for reform in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian society understands the West is engaged, and my hope is that the West will stay substantially engaged. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. That was actually a very succinct report and easy to understand. Bina, do we have copies of the report? So outside, you'll be able to get copies if you haven't already gotten it. Let me. Is that? That's not you. That's an old one, isn't it?
No, it's the one I published a year ago.
Yeah, okay. So that's not the report you'll be picking up outside. That was in the old days when he was at the Peterson Institute. Anyway, I'm now going to ask Madam Olga Bielkova, member of the Rada, to speak. And I would ask you to comment as to, of course, I'm sure you agree with most of the things that Anders mentioned. How realistic are they? Can the necessary steps be taken by the Rada to accomplish what Anders is suggesting? And it also seems that the most important things that have happened so far, Ukraine's only buying last year 6 BCM from Russia, maybe 9 BCM this year, if that. Not that much, still 6. They'll get 9 BCM from reverse flow from Europe. Yeah. So 6 BCM, and can that continue? And is the social network really working with respect to the subsidies? Or, prices have been raised in the past in Ukraine, and then when the government would get nervous, the prices would come back down again. And so will the elimination of subsidies really work? So if you could give us in 7 or 8 minutes your comments. Maybe I asked you too many questions. Then we'll go to Steve and Ed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether I should stand.
Whatever you want.
Everybody can see you.
But by the way, I should mention for people who are standing, we now have 3 seats available in the front. So if anybody wants to come down to the front, you can do that. Apologies again for the smallness of the room this time.
Yeah, well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and honor to be here today with you. I arrived yesterday and I feel like home right now. But I would like to start by expressing my special thank you and deepest gratitude to Dr. Oslund for his ongoing, regardless of all the news coming from Ukraine. We know each other for 10 years, almost 10 years. And I'm always amazed how people like him find passion and I would say even love to Ukraine, regardless once again of all known progress and strange news coming from our way. I always see, I thank you for that. So back to your question, whether we can continue reforms. I'd like to start by concluding, not only we can, but we should. We have no other way. And this is what I'm very confident about. However, we may see some challenges ahead of us. It is actually very easy today to be here and report to you in terms of energy sector reforms. For the first time in my political career, I actually have some steps I can report, which I already implemented. There are many steps to make, as you rightly pointed out, but let me just look from my point of view of what we've accomplished in 2015. You are right. For the first time in our history since independence, we were able to buy less gas from Russia, and even more so, we are buying now more from Europe, which is extremely important given our current circumstances of war with Russia. At the parliament, we passed a very crucial law, which is changing the way gas is being traded in Ukraine. It used to be like in a social country, somebody would set up a price. Not anymore. Right now, we are moving towards free market, and this is very important. We made first attempt in terms of political elites to kind of explain to people and being honest in terms of explaining them how much energy really costs. We've raised our tariffs. Usually politicians avoid talking about raising tariffs. This is not popular kind of slogans. And actually, I don't see it as an accomplishment, but it was necessity, because otherwise you cannot move forward. We actually, for the first time, we admitted that there is no such a thing as cheap Russian gas, because it comes in a way as a very expensive endeavor in terms of political corruption, in terms of war, in terms of abuse of Russia, all the rules in Ukraine. So as I look at Anders' report and prescriptions, I very much agree with everything. In fact, I had a very similar paper on my own published in Ukraine. I addressed it to those who are current ministers and deputy ministers in my country, and I was hoping that we will align our vision, me as somebody from the parliament who is pushing for the laws and them executing these laws. Let me quickly point out to you how we are progressing in 2016. As a politician, I agree with Anders that there is a very particular need right now to establish rules for a new professional independent energy regulator. This is important because we have gas market law, but a lot of work is done by the regulator in forms of the secondary legislation. And as a parliament, as somebody from the parliament, from this committee, I was taking a lead on preparing a new draft legislation, which is about to go to the parliament every day from now on. As soon as we have coalition, I hope I will report to you next time that we actually passed it. I see a huge need to clean up state-owned enterprises, especially in the area of energy production. Not only in terms of their management practices, which also has to be updated, but also in terms of avoiding any political influence on these companies. This is one of the crucial points for 2016, and I think Parliament will have to take a lead on that as well in terms of preparation, new legislation, and in terms of making whenever it's necessary, public discourse about non-acceptance of political influence on the way companies are managed. New market rules for electricity, I would like to report to you, Anders, that we've passed a law in our committee, and we expect it, once again, to be very soon considered by the Rada. It is of crucial importance to unbundle NAK Naftogaz, and I like better the word unbundling, because the breakup somehow, in our political rhetoric, it stands for kind of breaking it, removing from the market, and I don't think it's realistic right now until the moment they actually have a public service obligation. I think we should think in terms of how do we make NAK Naftogaz equal player on the market? How do we create opportunities for other companies to come to Ukraine and being either traders or extracting companies? How do we engage them to participate in our market? As I travel to different Western capitals right now, very often people ask me, Olga, how can we help Ukraine? And I think if there is my choice, I would invest, not because I'm on energy committee, but I think energy sector remains one of the most problematic sectors in Ukraine. If you remove corruption from energy sector, most probably you remove 80% of corruption in the country. That's why I have, here I a little bit differ from Anders' prescription. If we go back to his slides, and if we look at his slide about plea to West, I see too much of Russia. Look, Gazprom, Transit, which is mainly Russia, Gazprom, well, EU energy package, I strongly agree. Support Ukraine international. Here we see Ukraine. So my point is that we can fight forever with Russia. We can fight trying to discipline Gazprom, and it is all needed. But as a Ukrainian, as a politician coming from this country, which I think is a beautiful opportunity for investment, I try to make different plea. First of all, we need to increase our own capacity of producing all sorts of energy sources. This is my political dream. I don't want to buy gas from Russia, nor do I want to buy it from EU or anybody else. Ukraine is a gas-endowed country, and the only problem is somehow we are not doing enough to engage enough of investors to extract our own gas. So if you do want to help Ukraine, I'd say start partnership via PSA or any other type of partnership with Ukrainian companies. And this is the best type of investment you can do to help Ukraine to avoid even more dependence on foreign resources. Second, making subsidy system more efficient. There was supposed to be a decision by the government, by the current government, of second increase of prices as of 1st of April. Given current political circumstances, the decision was postponed. But there should be decision made as it is required by an IMF memorandum and our current way of transforming energy sector. But as we do it, we may see a situation that because of the current design of subsidies structure, as many as 70% of population will depend on subsidies. Last year, they decreased consumption by 20%. I discussed with many experts in Ukraine, and I found out that indeed it was kind of a behavioral change, because people knew that the prices are higher, they have to save. But it's not sustainable in the long run. People cannot save every year 20%. They just don't have technology, they don't have means to do it, because at some point they need a certain amount of gas to heat their apartments, which is not the case. And the whole design of subsidy system is not an ideal in my view. I think the West could have helped Ukraine to how do we structure this system of subsidies in such a way that each and every citizen has financial motivation to save energy and to be more efficient. When it comes to technology, I like to make a special case saying that we understand that, that households cannot continue to save energy because they are limited with their technology capacity. But heating generation companies are extremely outdated, they are underinvested, and they waste energy. So that's one of the other potential ways of helping Ukraine. How do we save energy? And of course, here I strongly agree with my next point with Anders in terms of Nord Stream. I cannot ask for more help in advocating on behalf of Ukraine that we need to come up with a good reasoning to overcome this buzz about Nord Stream as being just commercial. No, it's not. It's strongly against Ukrainian interests. And indeed, I think it is against European interests as well. All in all, once again, I agree with your report. We think in line. I commit my energy to fulfill each and every of your points as a parliamentarian. And whenever you see that we are not fulfilling any of your prescriptions, come to me and I will talk to our people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I know you'll be happy to know, I think we told you earlier, some of you must have been there. We had before you go, John, I'm going to introduce you. That last Friday we had a great debate on Nord Stream, and we had a straw poll afterwards, and 95% said that there should be no Nord Stream 2. Now, it's a little bit of a, a crowd here in Washington would be. But John had to get up to go, but I had neglected, he was hidden there in the fourth row when we started the program, to introduce John Herbst, our former ambassador to Ukraine, director of the Dinu Patriciu Eurasia Center, and the Global Energy Center and the Eurasia Center are cooperating all the time on energy programs. And so thank you, John. You can go now. Okay, and there's also still one seat up here if anybody wants to come up here. Okay, our next speaker is Steve Nicandros, who I introduced earlier. And Steve, you heard the plea for private sector involvement in Ukraine. What needs to be done from your standpoint? How optimistic are you? What do you see companies like yours doing in Ukraine?
Thank you, Dick, Anders. Can you hear me in the back okay? It's better if I stand up. You know, this is a hard act to follow because I think everything that you just heard is really important to bringing foreign investment into the country, and starting with having more members of parliament that have this kind of vision and this kind of realization of what needs to be done. Just by way of background, my company is an independent oil and gas company from Houston, Texas, here in the States. And we've been working around the greater Black Sea region for about 20 years. And in a prior life, working throughout the region for another 20 years. So I've had the benefit of watching this part of the world evolve for a few decades. And you know, as someone coming forward here with the desire to put capital at risk into an evolving and emerging environment like Ukraine, I can tell you we look at this very, very seriously. And much of what Anders has highlighted in his recommendations, you know, truly are at the heart of what attracts foreign investment. But if I could start from maybe a simplistic view, when you look at Ukraine today from an energy standpoint, oil and gas primarily, which I'll speak about, it represents tremendous potential in terms of extracting hydrocarbons. Today, the major basin in the north, the Dnipro-Donetsk basin, some may call it a mature basin, but by our standards here in the United States, it's still a very young basin that has a lot of opportunity to be recovered from its potential. In the west, along the Carpathians, this is a very prolific trend. And in the south, in the Black Sea basin, tremendous underexplored and underdeveloped potential. And within just these three areas that I've described, huge amount of untapped, and we don't know what we don't know, potential about the future. And what's attractive to a foreign investor in the energy sector is that really since the 1980s, I would say, as the Soviet Union collapsed and as funding was redirected to other places, there was a starvation of technology. And so after Ukraine's independence, the opportunity has come to bring the same kind of technological breakthroughs that we've seen turn this country into shortly a net exporter of oil and gas. The same potential, I believe, exists for Ukraine. What's it going to take to get there? The kind of reforms that Anders has spoken about in his recommendations. We've seen some great reforms already in the energy sector, and I can tell you that in our work in Ukraine, working directly with Naftogaz over the last couple of years, we've seen a new spirit and a new transformation that is very attractive to at least this Western company. And it's very heartening to be able to deal with people that want to be transparent, that understand the international business, that understand how free markets work, that understand the importance of creating a market environment that's very welcoming to foreign investment. So that's number one. Number two is, in order to achieve this big potential that exists in the country, there needs to be a huge amount of foreign capital brought into the country in order to extract it. All the technologies we're talking about, from advanced reprocessing of existing seismic to acquisition of new generation 2D and 3D seismic. I mean, in the country today is a tremendous amount of data that hasn't always had the benefit of modern day reprocessing techniques, that through these reprocessing techniques we see new and giant potential in the country. And let me put it in number terms, which I should have said at the outset. If you go back to the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, Ukraine was producing 70 billion cubic meters a year of gas. I mean, that's a huge volume of gas, consider. And if you look at the production curve, when the Soviet Union collapsed and you go into Ukraine's early independence, it leveled off at 20 billion cubic meters annually, roughly. My numbers may be a bit off. But what's relevant about that is that what you see is sort of a starvation of investment. And I really believe that with that reinvestment, you can see that curve go back up. And what does that mean? It means that Ukraine can become a net exporter of energy, net exporter of gas to Europe. And it's so well positioned to do that, being on the doorstep of European consumption markets, that it's a tremendous opportunity for Western investment to come in and be part of that renaissance of the Ukrainian oil and gas sector. Along those lines, there's a tremendous workforce that exists in Ukraine in terms of the scientific sector. People that have been working in these basins that I mentioned for many, many years. And this is a tremendous asset for foreign capital to come in and invest. And with that technical know-how that's in the country, it's an essential to building a proper organization and building a proper effort to reawaken these basins that I've spoken about. Moving to the progress that's been made. As I mentioned, Naftogaz truly has been good to work with, and I think for my company, we have seen new opportunities emerge because of that and the confidence in working with Naftogaz. What would make things more attractive and easier for Western investment is streamlining what it takes to acquire licenses in the country. It's quite a complicated process at the moment that in some ways can be seen as an Olympic event. You jump one hurdle, go to the other hurdle, go to the next hurdle, and I think having an ability, to put it in simple terms, maybe to have one-stop shopping for the energy sector, to where you can go to a ministry, for example, or an independent agency, and have the ability to apply, and then within a reasonable amount of time, be able to be awarded a license or negotiate and award a license so you can get to work, is really, I think, one of the big opportunities that is in front of Ukraine right now, and something that I think could, when we look at reforms, could really transform how international companies look at Ukraine as a potential place for investment. We talked about the unbundling of Naftogaz, and I think also in many ways, coming from the oil and gas sector, one has to be careful about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That there is a tremendous amount of know-how, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that exists within Naftogaz. And I think, as you put it, maybe breakup, or such a destructive term is not the right way to put it, because there are some good elements that are essential to a renaissance of these producing areas in the country. And in some ways, you have to consider companies like BP or Statoil all began as state companies at one time and found their way into the private sector. And maybe there's a middle model that could be there to preserve the good, that is there. Most importantly, is having a competitive environment. The third energy package is really important to be able to have a feeling as an upstream producing company, to have the feeling that you're going to have the ability to go into an environment that you won't be at a competitive disadvantage to a pre-existing monopoly. And having the ability to use your trading capabilities to trade what you produce, if you wish, in a market that is truly marked to the market, as opposed to being artificially managed. Then I'd say, lastly, in terms of Western support, I think we really do need a stronger push from here in this city in order to encourage, in particular, U.S. investment in Ukraine. For not only economic reasons, business from this country and the technology that comes from this country in the oil and gas sector can really build a bridge of understanding and a bridge of closer relations and a more competitive market. Again, I use the example that here in this city in 2003, our energy department said we were going to run out of gas in 10 years. And so we better build LNG importation facilities all around the country. And thanks to the technology of our industry, we're now converting those import facilities to export facilities. And I highlight that again because I think Ukraine holds the same potential. And that's what excites me about going to invest, putting our investment in this country. And if we can find our way to support Ukraine's security, that security creates the umbrella for investment, because it's not hundreds of millions of dollars that's required to achieve, getting closer again one day to the 70 billion cubic meters a year. It's billions of dollars of investment that's going to be required from the international community. And having that cover of security for those investments is going to be critical to that renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I would ask Ed to sum up and maybe give us a little bit of a reality check here. Nadia, who I've known for many, many years, she knows how much I care about Ukraine. My mother, my grandmother was from Odessa, and yet we've all been through a lot of ups and downs ever since Ukraine became independent. And is it different this time, do you think? What do you think, Ed? What's the reality with respect to what you've been hearing today?
Thank you, Dick, for the opportunity to join this panel today. I think I'm going to sit down so that fewer people can see me. And no one's ever had any problems hearing me before, so I think I'm going to sit. Anders knows that I have the utmost respect for his work. And in particular, I have utmost respect for his ability to maintain his optimism about Ukraine and Ukraine's energy sector reform, to which I support very much in spirit. Anders tells us the glass is half full. I'm constantly looking for where the glass is, and what I would put in it if I were to find it. So here's what I would put in it, and this is not only for working on Ukraine energy sector for almost 15 years now, something like that, but also from a couple of recent visits to Ukraine in December and March. The first problem, it seems to me, is that there is no united reform team on energy in Ukraine. The prime minister doesn't talk to the energy minister. At Naftahas and the energy ministry hardly talk to each other. And there is in contrast to say in the finance sector, it's hard to see a unified reform team in Ukraine right now. And I think, again, I think some of my co-panelists would agree with me on some of the points I'm about to make. It's kind of the perspective and the nuance you put in it. And that becomes a problem. When you have your economy minister resign 2 months ago, partly because of a scandal related to Naftahas and division within the government, that's a problem. When the home of the Secretary of Dorado's Energy Committee had a gasoline bomb thrown at it a couple of weeks ago, that's a problem. And so people are suspicious about what's really going on. I don't know if Olga's committee chairman is still the same or not, but he's a controversial figure. He's no longer, but he was Mr. Martynenko. I'm talking about, whose hotel I like to stay at when I'm there. So when you don't have public confidence, the game has a way of maintaining itself. Old habits die hard. So the first thing a new government needs, and I agree with Anders, a lot has been done, accomplished in 2015. He says the most since in the 25 years of Ukrainian independence, and I agree with him, but that's a really low bar, right? You need to articulate a reform vision and then sell it to the public in order to sustain the reform momentum, it seems to me. And most importantly, to the people's elected representatives in the Rada. So the Rada has a major role to play in it. But when you don't have that, then, and you have the same bureaucracy still there, licensing is a problem. I'm sorry, Steve, it's not a convoluted system because people like it that way. It's not an accident that it is the way it is. First, you probably need to fire half the people in the Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources, and then after you're done firing half, you fire the other half, and because otherwise, every stop is a rent-seeking opportunity. Pricing, yes, the burner tip prices have been reformed. Partly because of the IMF insistence, but I'm hoping not only. A little concerned why the next one was delayed. But wellhead prices need to be reformed. You don't reform wellhead prices and the way it's set, this arbitrage between artificially low wellhead prices and higher burner tip prices means that the shadowy market is maintained. One state entity who says it's an oil company and doesn't really produce gas, but doesn't give its gas to its parent company because it's never going to be paid for it, and instead transfer that gas to some oligarch's petrochemical plant. I mean, I'm not making these things up. These are examples the Ukrainian colleagues presented to me just last month. So you need to have a vision, a plan, a pathway to get you to where you want to go. And of course, you can't do it overnight. I mean, I'm realistic there. I would blow up Naftahaz myself in a controlled explosion, because I think it's very hard to reform a national oil company, and I may be biased by having just returned from Brazil. It's very hard to reform a national oil company whose membership, whose management is appointed politically, and have that national oil company be your competitor, your partner, and your regulator all at the same time. That's really hard to achieve. Finally, Naftahaz has audited financial accounts published last year without reservation. That's great. How about some of its subsidiaries? How about publishing separate financial accounts for Ukretransgaz, for example, which is the subsidiary that a lot of people are concerned about. Now, the 2009, Anders wanted me to say something about the 2009 gas contract. I advised the State Department in March of 2014, the first thing the new Ukrainian government should do is to renounce the 2009 gas contract signed by Tymoshenko, because it was technically fundamentally flawed. Instead, this has continued. All subsequent agreements with Russia has been amendments to that base agreement. That was a strategic mistake, which will put Ukraine in a very vulnerable position when it comes to arbitration in Stockholm. Ukraine needs a lot of help on capacity building. And this is on Ukrainian economic reform in general. Let's face it, it's going to take tens of billions of dollars over a 5 to 10 year effort on the part of the West. I agree with Anders on that. The West haven't supported Ukraine sufficiently on economic reform. But the problem is that they pretend to reform and we pretend to support them. Unless we put in the kind of the commitment that's truly required. The good thing about the energy sector, though, unlike other reform areas that I imagine to be even more difficult, healthcare, for example, or education, is that the energy sector can release economic value. It can make the country richer. It can make the government coffers richer, unlike other sectors. But in order to do that, you need public confidence that what you're doing is honest and the right things to do, and you have to sell that first. It cannot be a redivision of spoils, a different oligarchic groups taking over what other oligarchic groups controlled before. It's really nice to have this show of Mr. Kolomoisky withdrawing from Ukretransnafta, but if other people come in instead, that doesn't tell the kind of story you want. And the Ukrainian public is extremely skeptical after 2 years that not sufficient have been done, and what is being done may be explained by other reasons. I mean, Steve is absolutely right. Ukraine has the potential to be more than energy self-sufficient, as it was before. The problem with Ukraine was never geology. It was the above-ground risks in Ukraine that has stifled investment in the Ukrainian energy sector. And until Ukraine demonstrates the political will and we can inject some capacity to help on that authentic energy reform, I'm still very concerned that we are left in a very vulnerable position. Ukraine should be an asset to European energy security, not a liability. And unfortunately, in Brussels and other European capitals, it is often seen as a liability. With that, I'll stop. Did I provoke enough?
Yeah, I think you did. I think you did, and I think that you are voicing a lot of frustration that many of us have seen from the last 20 plus years of failed attempts at reform, and maybe a couple of steps forward and then things just falling back again. And so the question that I would ask the rest of the panel, I guess starting with Anders, is, why is this different? I mean, you know, you have a very, you all pointed, very unpopular government right now. There'll be elections. Is there going to be a, you know, an attempt to roll back prices again and creating more subsidies because people are going to be upset about what they're paying? Is it going to be the same old story all over again, or is this really different? Can you justify, Anders, your optimism that it might be different? And also, Steve and Madam Bielkova, why do you think it might be different?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ed, for excellent critical comments. First, what concerns who has done the reforms? Essentially, it has been the leadership of Naftagaz that has formulated reform, and they have had support from the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Economy, and substantial support from the Prime Minister, and got the support they needed from the Rada. Who has not supported anything has been the Minister of Energy. So this has been the big discrepancy in it. And what I'm concerned about now, it is that Ukraine did not increase the gas prices for households as promised to the IMF now on the 1st of April. This is vital and needs to be done. If you have got market prices, market-adjusted prices for energy, normally they hold, but you have to unify them. So Ed is quite right that there is still this arbitrage between control prices and at various levels, but it is much less than it was before. It has to be eliminated. If it's eliminated, I think that it will hold. And with regard to reforms, they are always messy processes. Leszek Balcerowicz was the most hated man in Poland when he did the reforms there. Now everybody tells us that it was easy to do reforms in Poland because there was a public consensus. Nothing of the kind. And if you look upon the most successful reform countries in the post-communist period, the 3 Baltic countries and Poland, they changed government on average every year. They had 10 different governments in the first decade, each of them. So therefore, if your main problem is corruption, you won't get a united team because you will always have people who are bought by the corruption that is still possible in the system. So a unified reform team is impossible. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened virtually anywhere, and it won't happen. Instead, you want political destabilization. I think it would be very good with early elections because some part of the parliament, not Olga, but other parts of the government, parliament need to be renewed, and that you do through early elections. So I'm not afraid of political instability, not that there is strong dissonance within the government. What's important is that it moves forward, and this, of course, is to say, as Ed also says, that the West must not give up on Ukraine. This is doable.
Any comments from you, Madam Bielkova, from Steve?
Yeah, well, I wish I had Ed's eloquence and sense of humor and ability to kind of put difficult information in a joyful way. But let me tell you, I kind of agree with you in terms of the way you list facts, but I see them in a different manner. And let me just bring you a few of the points. Yes, I agree that there is no unity of voice. And yes, I agree that not all the ministers are in love with each other. But you'd be surprised, as somebody who was go-betweener, arbitrating, let's say, new gas market law, I worked with everybody and I was able to gather their support when it was needed. which was not the case with the previous governments, which was not the case when I was in opposition. So I do see difference. Not only that, but my mom, my friends, they knew what I was working on, which was not the case with the previous parliaments. People know what new gas market law means. Well, some parliamentarians didn't read the law, but people know. And I think this time, society at large, expert community, NGOs, they control my life. You know, every month I run 1 or 2 public hearings. By the time I come home, I lose 2 kilograms of weight because they ask tough questions and they push me to do hard work in a very different professional manner. So that's one. Society is very much involved and they expect change and they put pressure. Second, I think circumstances of war and our economic situation make this case very different from the previous times. And as I said from the very beginning, some politicians do not want to raise prices. Who would want to raise prices for gas? But they understand they have to. The reality is, well, whether it's IMF not committing any additional funds which are necessary for economy at large, or because we finally understood there is no cheap gas in our country. So people will buy more into this logic of reforms. But I totally agree with you that there is no strategy around how to explain reforms. That's why I actually started writing blogs, because I think, well, sometimes it's easier for me to explain it, not the minister, but and some of the people in the executive office, and some people actually they do understand this explanation. But I agree with you, more has to be done. And I strongly disagree with you, surprisingly. I don't believe in early elections. I think we have enough of disruption, especially with the current law on elections. Well, what you end up with, you will have less August. You will have a lot of interruption in terms of all the processes. Right now, I have law on regulator, law on electricity market. I have fiscal regime for oil and gas companies. I actually know what to do. I read your books. You know, I know what to do. It's just every time we are about to do something, there is another interruption, which is not good. So I ask you to revisit your observation. Let's see what we can do so this Rada is more efficient. It's not that I'm afraid of not being part of the third term. It's just I do want to change Ed's perception of Ukraine. I do want him to come and be as much optimistic as you are right now. So please help me to help.
I want to say, going back to your very first comment, as eloquent as Ed was, you have certainly matched him.
Thank you.
Steve, any comments? And then we'll go to the audience for some questions.
Just a brief comment. You know, I think it's easy to, it's always easy to give advice, you know, and I know that's why we're here. But part of this is a dance that, you know, a dance requires 2 participants. And I think the private sector bringing investment is the counterbalance to this dance. And there has to be a willingness of risk takers to work in an imperfect world to create a reason to evolve and a reason to change. If we sit too much and paint this awful picture, there are going to be very few risk takers like us that are willing to go in and bet that things will change. And you know, as I said earlier, the reason we're betting that things will change is that when we meet members of parliament, when we meet the new management of Naftogaz, you get a spirit that says, this is worth making a bet on, that things are going to change, that there's, I can't describe it, you know, it's and I've got a big gut, it's a gut feeling, you know. It's a gut feeling that this is a risk worth taking. And I think somehow we have to find a way to encourage the risk takers to come into an imperfect situation on the bet that over the long term, economic logic will prevail because of the potential that Ukraine has and the potential that the country's natural resources have to generate the kind of revenues for the country, the kind of employment for the country that is going to be the fuel for turning it around. If the advertisement's always up that this is a mess, it's pretty hard to attract that. And so somewhere there has to be a balance of how this message is being put out.
Okay, let's go to the audience. I see a hand right here towards the front. If you could identify yourself, we have a microphone for you. We have about 15 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be brief. Myron Rabi, Dentons. We're a law firm, largest law firm in the world. We have a large, substantial office in Kiev, and I'm in charge of the energy sector. An observation and a comment. I agree with you, Olga. I think elections would be a disaster. If you want to see a low voter turnout, have new elections, as people do not want them. If you talk to people in Ukraine, it is not a positive step. What I'm concerned about is one of the points you raised, Osland, and that you're focusing on, fiscal reform for private energy. And I champion Frontera for being there, and I champion my clients for being there. You can't have a revolution. You can't have a war. You can't have very trying fiscal restraints on the private sector and a focus on long-term macroeconomic reform in the energy sector. It's successful. I completely agree that Naftogaz is doing a great job. But you've killed the private oil and gas industry in the last 2 years, year and a half. Only as of January were tariffs changed that were just prohibitive. The majors in the sector are out. PSAs in the shale gas out. Everybody has reduced their development programs virtually to a standstill because the tariffs were prohibitive. I have no idea why there was such a dichotomy between the energy sector and Ministry of Finance in trying to get these things changed. Now, you have a horrible picture of investment in the past year and a half in private energy. This year, as of January, it's only getting started. Now, you need to add your law, which everybody will support, in the private sector in particular, but you need to have a consistent message that we're not going to go back to what we did before. We need to understand that if we're only talking of private sector investment as of January, we're not going to get any private sector investment really until the next year or the year after. So we have 2 years, a year and a half of a horrible situation in the private sector. So there has to be a lot of encouragement of existing investors to fill that gap. And in that regard, you need to have, yes, a reduced procedural constraints to issue licenses, but the government also has to issue worthwhile licenses. Because historically, when they had a tender on gas licenses, they were all crap. Nobody wanted to invest in them. I mean, it was a standing joke. They had the same list that was moved over year after year after year. Everybody looked, I've seen that list. Nobody's interested in it. Because all of the nice, worthwhile assets would go into private hands. That needs to change as well to make that attractive for you to invest. Great, we have a short procedure, but do you have anything you want to buy? And lastly, I think it's important, we hope that fiscal restraints will be eased up slowly, that the IMF will let that happen. Because as we understand, but you need to allow business to restructure. You need to allow business to get money out of Ukraine to reinvest it into Ukraine. And right now that can't happen very well. And bearing in mind that the last year and a half has caved valuations on Ukrainian assets to a bare minimum. Burisma stands here as I believe they were on the list of people here who acquired a Ukrainian asset, Serenus. That's the only major transaction in Ukraine in the market in the last year and a half. In fact, they acquired it from my client. Our client remains. If you look at the valuations, they're tremendously low. So there's a good opportunity to enter the market if the message, with the help of Olga and private sector, remains strong. But that's where the encouragement is needed. My personal view, obviously, I'm from the private sector, but that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. They were extensive but important, and you made, I think, some very important points. And I think that it comes back, it seems to me, to the key point that that maybe we didn't talk enough about on the panel, that there are perceived and real commercial and political risks right now in Ukraine that have to be taken into account. Steve, I think, deserves a lot of credit as being an exceptional risk taker, but there aren't many companies willing to do that. And that it's important that this has to be different this time, and it's going to take some time to take the kind of actions that were just being discussed that you brought up, and it's going to take some time. But I guess that's my comment.
Let me just tell you, I'm really thankful to you for you bringing this issue up, because usually whenever I go to all these energy conferences, I talk about taxation, I talk about my plans, how do we change fiscal terms. And this time I thought, well, I'm in Washington, people are very smart here, and we should talk about like geopolitics and Gazprom and what have you. So let me report to you. Just before I departed for DC, I talked to IMF people, technical mission, and it was a conversation to kind of compare our feelings for this year change. So we are still discussing, and the decision is to be made by the 1st of July. That's the plan. 1st of July, the new system of taxation for oil and gas industry as of beginning of 2018. Because that's a completely new system. So what we are discussing right now is lowering royalties, most probably, but once again, that's my vision, one rate, not two rates as it used to be, depending on the depth, and CPT surcharge. We worked, as you know, with IHS. They had different models. I am personally in favor, after talking to many people like you, who I try to drag into Ukraine to bring for long-term investment. I'm in favor of low royalty and additional CPT surcharge, regardless of the amount. I think it will take care of the geological conditions and profitability in itself. So this is what we are working on it. On right now, unfortunately, because of the budget scheme being criticized too much, but the one which was offered by the Minister of Finance, Yareska, oil and gas issue was part of the package, which was blocked in that package. So we are waiting for the new government, and if they do not submit this law, I will, I promise.
We have five more minutes, so let's take another question, and then we should give the panel, some maybe brief concluding comments. I see a hand over there.
Ilya Zaslavsky, energy consultant and researcher at Chatham House and Legatum Institute. Two quick questions. Firstly, Panama Papers mentioned yesterday that United Russia deputy Alexander Babakov owns 20% of VS Energy company in Ukraine. So my question is, how much Russian-controlled ownership of energy assets in Ukraine reduced, and how much of it is remaining in Ukraine, and how is it influencing your reforms and your process in the energy sector? And a second question on Ukrainian gas storages. No one mentioned them. I presumed that they were big part and big sort of asset for integrating with Europe. But are they now? What is going on with them? Are they a liability or an asset? How do you see their place in energy development in Ukraine? Thanks.
Is it to me?
To anyone who feels.
Why don't you start anyway?
Yeah, well, on Panama Papers, to be honest, I didn't know about this recent development. In general, I think the more transparency we bring in terms of beneficial ownership, in terms of oil and gas companies, the better it is, regardless of who is behind, whether it is former Minister of Ecology of Ukraine or somebody who is PEP from Russia. There is a common feeling right now in Ukraine that Russian investors are perceived differently from before. This is not to say we don't want to see any Russians, but especially in the area of energy, I think we would rather see more of US and EU investors or Asian, but given our war and given that the gas was always a threat to our country, we would probably prefer to have less of investment. However, we develop country with rule of law, so whatever will happen with these assets should happen according to international standards. By no means I'm advocating to kind of put at question their ownership. We will investigate it further. To your second question, storage facilities and transmission system, it was actually one of my points, but I omitted it, so thank you for bringing it up. One of the ways to help Ukraine is actually to invest into storage facilities and transmission system. Nord Stream 2 is presented as a commercial matter of different companies. I do want to sell the same story about our transmission system. Once European and US investors will take part in this endeavor, it will be fairly easy to deflect all the attacks by Russian populists and commercial managers. So that's we see it as potential asset. But I know that it will not be easy to do. And here I hope that Naftogaz management and country leadership will take it very seriously. And they will lead these negotiations and they will have it as their priority.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, I don't think we can take any more questions. It's 5:30 and we always stop on time. But I would ask the panelists if you have like 30-second concluding remarks, if any, don't feel compelled, that you would like to make. Ed.
I just want to say that I completely agree with Olga that what I found in my last two visits is that the strength of the country is in civil society. There's open discussion of all the issues, facts are being brought up. There's investigative reporting if there's suspicion of wrongdoing. Ukraine has demonstrated more than once, certainly in 2004, 2005, and then again in 2013 and 2014, that the strength of the country is in society and not its political leadership. And this is why I made such a strong point on the need to gain public support, and public support through its elected representatives in order to sustain the path. Otherwise, Dick likes to compare Ukraine energy sector reform with the movie Groundhog Day, and I'm surprised he hasn't brought this up yet. And if you think about
that's such an old line of mine, I'm finally giving it up.
If you think about the movie Groundhog Day, the Bill Murray character actually learned after many, many failed attempts. It's actually a film about redemption, about the possibility for change, the possibility of improving yourself internally. But my concern about Ukraine is how many chances does it get?
Right.
And going back to Dick's point, that this is really a critical moment. And seizing that opportunity is very important. And again, the strength is really in the Ukrainian people, and we should see the Ukrainian people as an ally in that process and not an obstacle to be overcome.
Any last comments?
Yeah, let me answer this question about Russian ownership. It's been pretty squeezed out generally. Previously, Lukoil had the Odessa refinery. It happened to be taken over in a raiding attack by Yanukovych oligarch Kurchenko. Rosneft had Lysychansk refinery. It is now stalemated by the war, hasn't worked for a couple of years, not likely to come back. There's only one refinery that is actually working. It's Kremenchuk refinery that a certain Igor Kolomoisky has raided from Russian Tatneft. And Ukraine had to pay $100 million in damages to Tatneft for this raiding through the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Babakov indeed owns these VSE distributors, but this is not really all that much. And Lukoil and Rosneft have sold their gas stations, not very many, to some unknown Swiss companies that we take for granted are themselves. So Lukoil gas stations are now called Amic. I presume that is supposed to be amicable. And the Rosneft gas stations have also been renamed. So this is not a big issue. That's the main point about it. With regard to the regime of independent producers, it has been awful. Olga talked about the tax issues that is being fixed, I think. Steve talked about the licensing issue. The problem is that you have 11 agencies that are fighting each for their part of the rent, particularly the Ministry of Ecology and Ministry of Energy, but not only. There's been also a problem with access to pipelines and access to markets and price regulation. So this has been completely messed up. Independent gas production fell by 3% last year. This has to be fixed. But I did not discuss it because I don't think that it can be fixed in 1 year. Unfortunately, it will take longer time.
Okay, 30 seconds.
I won't speak much more other than to say there's a lot of opportunity here for those that are willing to bet on the future. And it's not about this generation, it's about the next one. And the clock is running on this generation, no question, but the next one's waiting, and that's life. And so there's a lot of opportunity here that I think, as I said earlier, we need to accept an imperfect world and keep trying to make it better with each year that passes.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, I think we had a great discussion, and by now you know almost everything about Ukraine. But I wanted to end with a provocative question. Ed, you know more than I do about energy in Ukraine. How about becoming Minister of Energy?
My grandmother was not born in Odessa.
Good answer. On that note, let's thank our panel. It was a great discussion.